I invite you to open your Bibles to Acts chapter 17. We will be there momentarily. We're talking about convictions. What kind of convictions do you have? Now, not legal convictions. If you've been, I don't want to know what convictions you may have faced from the court system or anything like that. But convictions are this firmly held belief. They're the kind of things that can't be easily shaken, even in the face of things that may contradict what you hold to. You still believe them, so you don't just easily accept contradictions. Yeah, I think we all have convictions, even though we don't necessarily often discuss them. They are those core beliefs that form the foundation of our choices and direction of our life. When life doesn't make sense, and this morning I've had a number of people talking about various things that are going on in their life, or people that they care about in their life, and it's easy to look at it and say, boy, these crisis moments, life doesn't make sense. But it's our convictions, it's those beliefs that we call into play that help us make sense out of life. Now here's the thing. Some people have flimsy, very, very flimsy convictions. If you have flimsy convictions where they're not really based on reality, and there's people out there like that, one of the things that I don't mean to make light of people, but there's a group of people out there that still hold to that the earth is flat. I'm sorry, that's a very flimsy conviction. It's everything tells us that the earth is round. It doesn't make any sense, but yet they hold to it, and I've read some of their reasoning, and even their reasoning is like, wow, that you really believe that, and they really do. That's a flimsy conviction. There's other flimsy convictions. People have flimsy convictions about love, and there's people that will tell me that, oh no, they know this person loves them, and it's like, okay, all the evidence tells you that is not love. Love is not this selfish thing that is a one-way street. Love actually gives and seeks the best for the person that you love. And without some evidence of that, I feel like that's a very flimsy conviction. And if you have flimsy convictions, you're going to make decisions in life that are foolish or harmful. Especially in crisis moments. When you're trying to figure out in those difficult times in life, and we all face those difficult times in life, where we need to hold to something, we need to try to make sense of something, and we struggle making sense of it. If we have flimsy convictions, we are going to make foolish decisions in those moments. For some, it's not that we have flimsy convictions, it's just that flimsy that our convictions are not deeply held. When we have convictions, and we would agree more or less in our convictions, those are shaky. I mean, when you have to add that feeling, that thought, more or less, it's probably less than it is more. It doesn't mean that you hold it deep enough. It's more what we want to be true, what we hope is true, rather than what we believe is true. And if we have these shaky convictions, then we're going to be flighty. We're going to be easily swayed. Scripture describes it as being tossed about. We'll agree with one person over here, and then the next person comes along, if they have a different argument, we like it, so yeah, I'm going to agree with that. Then we go back to the other person, and they give us an answer to the argument that we heard, and oh yeah, I agree with that. And you find yourself going back and forth, and you never really can find any true answers in life because you don't have any true convictions in life. I feel like, unfortunately, there are many Christians that fall into that category concerning convictions. They're just tossed about. Believe one thing one moment and something else the next. But if our convictions are based on truth, on very solid foundation, and they're firmly held, what we find is that they sustain us during the most difficult times in life. It is these convictions that give us direction on a daily basis. Keep us strong in those crisis moments. In those moments when I have to share this, about Matt, and I don't mean to embarrass Matt in any way, but this morning I came in and I knew, because Matt's usually here on Sunday mornings before me. And if you know Matt, this is Matt. Doesn't matter what's going on, this is Matt. There's no highs, there's no lows, there's just Matt. He pulled in, and at first I thought it was Abby pulling in. And my first thought was, okay, I need to tell Abby she needs to slow down when she's pulling through the parking lot. Wow, there's buildings here. He's running behind. You can tell he's a little flustered. And he came on in, and I came in, and then when I walked into, they were getting ready to practice, and he's describing his day. I see more emotion from Matt than I have seen the entire time that I've known him. Now, it was still, this is Matt, it was only like about right here. But when you heard everything, here was my thought, because they got 2 cars down, power was out, took a cold shower, had to shave in the dark, and the list went on and on and on. Man. Yeah, I don't know that, and here's what he said. I'm thankful for my salvation. Convictions. Man, convictions sustain us. They help us make sense out of when everything's going wrong and nothing makes sense. Because his day didn't make any sense to me. All I could think of is, man, I'm glad that's not me. And I was feeling kind of bad because we had a couple of days this week where we only had 2 cars and we got 3 people, and it's like, I was looking for somebody to adopt Sarah for the week until we got the 3rd car back. It was like, wow. And then you hear this and it's like, wow, sometimes we get things in life mixed up. And we don't know how to make sense out of life. And Matt would be the first to tell you that his problems are really just surface problems. And that there are deeper things. And the reality is, I've heard this morning from people right here, some of you in this room, and you're going through deeper things. You really are going through the kind of things that it's hard to make sense out of life. When those things take place in our life. And it is those convictions that we hold to deeply that'll keep us strong in those crisis moments. Help us make sense out of life. So we're going to begin this series this morning on convictions. And I'm narrowing it down, and I know we could break this apart and we could go all year on the different things that we ought to have as convictions. But I decided I'm going to narrow it down to 3 convictions that we all need. As I looked at it, I studied it, and these 3, I think they help us form the basis of all of life. If we hold to these convictions, they're going to help us make sense of the past, they're going to help us make sense of the present, they're going to help us make sense of the future. And in the end, isn't that where we get, that's what we start wondering about when things going wrong, and why was my past, or where did my past come from, what's going on in my life now, and what's coming? What's coming in my life, and where is this world headed? And I think that we can discover the answers to these things if we have the convictions about God, about life, and about death. I think if we have the right convictions about God, the right convictions about life, the right convictions about death, I think we'll be able to make sense out of all the chaos that we find in our life, all the chaos that we find in this world, and be able to stand on solid ground. So this morning, we're going to start with convictions about God. Convictions about God. Because this answers the questions about the past. Because everyone grapples, I believe, I've never met anyone that has spent any time reasoning about life. They grapple with some very basic questions in life. I think we have to. And you may word them different in your own mind, but I think these are basic issues that throughout the ages people have tried to answer. Where did I come from? Why do I exist? Is this it? Or is there something more to life? And of course, all these, you got to get that where did I come from right. Where did this all begin? How are we here? You know, the answer to these questions, first, to answer these questions, there's another question we have to answer that we also grapple with. Is there a God? Is there a God? And if there is, who is he? Something within us tells us that there's a God. Reality is when we travel, when you travel around the world, most people believe that there is a God. They struggle identifying him, but they believe inherently that there is a God. Romans chapter 1 tells us for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. Ever since the beginning, there's this evidence that there is a God. And somehow we know that there is a God. And the things that have been made so that they are without excuse. We know there's a God. People everywhere know there's a God. They may not know God, but they know that there's a God. Most of the world believes that. They just don't know who he is. It's a very flimsy, we talked about flimsy convictions. It's a very flimsy conviction if you say there is no God. Now, it's interesting because the world in which we live, what we hear the most of, what we hear that we would believe, they would have us to believe that the majority opinion or the right opinion is that there is no God. That we are all here by accident, that there's another explanation other than God that is the reason for creation. That's how we began, is not through God, something else. That is a minority opinion. Most of the world does not believe that. Because the reality is, it's a very flimsy conviction if you hold to that. You find yourself in a crisis moment, and this is where that kind of conviction comes in. The reality is, if there is no God, you have no right to tell me what's right and what's wrong. Because you are not the God over me either. If there is not a creator, then you have no right to proclaim yourself as God in my life to tell me what's right and what's wrong. I decide. And a lot of people do that. And it creates problems. It creates chaos. It creates crisis. We go back to, it's like, oh, wait a minute. When I try to do what I want, when I become the God, the problem is, I can make myself God over my life, and you can make yourself God over your life, and at some point, they're going to collide. They just will. And it creates chaos. And in the midst of crisis, why is there crisis? Why is there, if there is no God? Well, that's why there's crisis. And this idea that somehow we're going to get better and that we're going to improve without a God, that things are just going to keep evolving to a better way. Well, no, what we see is that society gets worse. And the things that are taking place in the world. Reasonable people everywhere throughout all of time had this conviction that there is a God. But who is he? What is God like? What does God want from me? Can I even know him? Those are the questions that people are grappling with. Not only here, all around the world, people are grappling with that question of who is God? And even people who call themselves Christians, I think many of them have a shaky conviction about God. I say this because even though they claim to know God, they do not live their life as though there is a God. Their life contradicts the idea that there's a God as described in Scripture. Too many times they go back to the same idea, the same thought that there is no God, and become a God to themselves. So what do? Anytime we do what we want instead of what we know that God wants, even if we claim that we know that there's a God, even if we claim that we know God, but we still do what we want, that's a contradiction. That is a contradiction in life. That's a contradiction in your belief. That you know God, but yet you still will proclaim yourself as God in your life. See, they deeply want there to be a God. The problem is, sometimes we want God to be more like us than wanting us to be more like God. And I think this is a commonly held conviction. And it'll leave your life in despair if you seek a lesser God. A God based upon your imaginations or what you desire in life, rather than just God and who He is. You know, the pursuit of God has always been. There's always been this pursuit of God. And when Paul was traveling around and doing his missions and sharing Jesus Christ, he came to a group in Athens. And these were a very religious people that he came across in Athens. And he confronted them. They were very polytheistic. In other words, they had a lot of gods. They had a God for everything because they couldn't answer questions and they couldn't understand why things were the way they were. So they just put a God and they designed a God to be in charge of the various areas of life. But even with all their gods, they still knew deeply within themselves that there had to be one God, one true God, a God that they did not know, a God that they could not invent, a God who was over everything, a God that could make sense out of all of life. So they built a statue to the unknown God. We're going to worship the unknown God, but we don't know this God. But we believe that He exists. They were right. And Paul would go on and stand before them and give them an answer to that which they were seeking answers to. Not only is there a God, but to describe what God is like, and also to let them know that God deeply wants to be known by them. And this is the convictions that we need about God. So we're going to break apart Acts chapter 17, this message that Paul is delivering to the Athenians in who God is and seeking to answer their questions, because these are the things that we ourselves need to be convinced of. The first thing that we need to be convinced of about God is not an invention of man. God is not an invention of man. Paul would tell them in verse 24, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is He served by human hands as though He needed anything, since He Himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. You know what he's saying? God is absolutely sovereign. And He is not reliant upon us at all. He can't be relegated to one place or another. You can't confine him to this temple. Not only can you not confine him to this temple, but you can't confine him to this area of creation. Because the Greeks and the Romans had all kinds of gods. We talked about that already. They had dominions over all these different areas. They had gods over the sea. They had gods over the sky. They had gods over the moon. Gods over the harvest. God over love. God over war. Any area of life. If somebody came up with a new area of life, you know what they had to do? Come up with a new God. And they would. And they would create a new God to be over, to explain somehow the things that would happen in that area of life. So when they couldn't figure out love and relationships, well, we need a God. A God who is kind of at odds with other gods at different times. And kind of works with other gods to explain why love doesn't always work out the way we want it to work out. And it seems like the God of love, but most of the time he is talking with the God of war, and they are working together to create confusion and chaos in life. And they tend to work against each other. And Paul says, oh no, that is not what takes place. This God is a sovereign God. The one true God is a sovereign God. This God that you worship, that you say you don't know, here's who he is. He is a sovereign God. He is an omnipresent God, which, you know, the theological term omnipresent means that he is present everywhere. But I think it's more accurate to understand it as everything falls within the presence of God. God is not bound to be in all these places, but everything is bound to God. So that there is not anything, so there's no place in your life that you go that you can get away from God. There's no secret hiding places in your life that you can hide from God. Because everywhere you go, that place was created by God and is in subjection to God. He said, and the other thing that you have to understand, because he's sovereign, he's not served by man. He's self-reliant. There's nothing that you or I can give to God that adds anything to him. Nothing. We can't add anything to God by what we give to him. So why do we serve him? If there's nothing that we can give to him that he needs, that would add to him in any way, why do we serve him? Well, to make him happy. To appease him. And that's what we find a lot of the other gods in the world, a lot of other religions and their gods. What they do is they have gods that it is necessary to appease them. Got to keep them happy. Got to do things to make sure that we stay on God's good side. You know how you really stay on God's good side? You know how you please God? Faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Without a deeply held conviction that there's one true God and that he is sovereign, it's impossible to please him. So flimsy convictions are unpleasing to God. Shaky convictions are unpleasing to God. You can't make up for shaky convictions with the amount of money that you give, with the amount of help that you give to the less fortunate, with the number of times that you're in church. That won't make up for shaky convictions. Only this deep-seated conviction. See, the best reason to be here this morning, and I know every time we gather together, see, I like to kid myself, every time we gather together, everyone's here for the right reason, the right purpose. The reality is, some of you're here because somebody else made you be here. You're here because not only, maybe they did make you be here, but in your mind, you go, the only way I'm going to keep peace at home is if I go to church. That's the wrong reason. Now, here's the thing. God will still reveal himself to you no matter why you're here. But the best reason, the only reason that God is pleased with in you being here is because you believe in the one true God and you want to worship him. Why? Because he's God. He's God. That's why we worship him, not because he needs anything from us. We believe that he is God. And we've expressed this before when it comes to the area of giving of finances. God loves a cheerful giver. The only way I think you can be cheerful about giving is you believe that there is a God. If you are not deeply convicted that there is a God, then I think giving would be a struggle. It would be for me. If I'm not, the only reason to give is because of I believe that there's a God. I love him. So giving becomes an extension of worship. The reason to serve is because there's a God who loves me. I'm going to serve him. He loves others. I'm going to serve others. Why? Because he's God. And so he is not an invention of man. And our service to him is evidence of our convictions about God. Now, some will try to recreate an image of God that fits their convictions or what they would like for God to be. This is what I would like for God to be. But in your convictions, you need to be convinced that God is not beholden to your ideas of who he should be. I always find it interesting that people who claim not to be Christians, and you see this because of the media and everything that we have, people who have no qualms about saying, oh, I'm not a Christian. But if you're a Christian, this is how you ought to respond. How can someone who doesn't know God, who would claim they have these flimsy convictions in their own life that there is no God, well, then how can they tell me, who I do have a personal relationship with God? I am convinced, not only that he exists, but I know him. How can you tell me how I ought to be responding to him if you don't even believe that he exists? You know, what I need to do is discover more about who he is and subject myself to his sovereignty and his authority and not change the way who he really is to fit what I want, but to be subject to him, to recognize his authority. Because God is not an invention by man. Paul would go on to say, but you also need to be convinced about this, that God created us to know him. Not only is God sovereign, he exists and he's sovereign and he is over all things, but being over all things, he created us to know him. In verse 26 he says, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. So God created everyone. He decided in eternity past where you would be born and the time frame in which you were born. You ever wondered why you exist today? Because see, I don't know about you, I've thought about this. What time period would I want to live in? I grew up watching John Wayne. So I've always wanted to be in the Old West. And I'm not sure if I've been an outlaw or a sheriff. Maybe, of course, in the Westerns, all the best Westerns, the sheriffs were a little crooked anyway. Even the good guys were a little bad. I don't know where I would have been, but that's but all, I know all that, the Westerns and stuff, much of that is not really accurate. That is like, wow, what would it be like? What would it have been like if I had been in the Old West? How would I have survived? How would I have done things? How would I have handled the hardships that they had that we don't have today? But we have hardships today that they never even dreamed of back then. But here's the reality. I'm wasting my time thinking about that. Because God ordained in eternity past that I be born during this time. This is the time. This is the place that God had already determined in eternity past the boundaries of the period and the time and the place that I should be. And not only did he determine that that my existence would fall within a certain time period in a certain place. This is what he says about everyone that he created, and he created everyone, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he's actually not far from each one of us. So here's what Paul's telling them. He's telling these people of Athens who were wondering about God, God created you, and he created you to be here at this time, at this place. That's what you hear me say this a lot on Sunday mornings in the greeting. Man, God, I don't know why you're here, but God has a reason and purpose for you. Because God does. You've never lived a day in your life that God didn't have a purpose for you. And when we open up his word and look to him, he's got something that he wants to give to you. He is that involved in our lives. He is willing to work in your life. He wants you to know him. He created you so that you would seek him and feel your way toward him. If you don't know, if you can't just automatically find God, that you can feel your way towards God. I don't know fully. Darren, you might be able to tell me if this is true. If this is not true, just sit there and kind of look like it is true. My uncle was a volunteer fireman for years and years and years in a small town in Oklahoma, Preston, Oklahoma. And I remember him telling me they'd gone to training one time. We were up there visiting family reunion, and he was talking about the training that he'd been in. And they went to a burn building. And in the training, it simulated a house on fire, a building on fire. And the smoke gets so thick and so black, you can't see anything. Is that true? Okay. And he said that one of the things they're taught is to find the wall and keep your hands on the wall and move around, because eventually you'll come to an opening. You stay low, you find the wall, and then you don't go out. If you think in your mind, oh, it's back this way, you don't just turn and go the way you think, you follow the wall. Is that true? And you've always found your way out. So it must not be that hard. And God is saying, I've given you a way to find me, even in all the darkness. Not only did I create you for a specific time, I've made it possible for you to find me. You may have to feel your way. You may have to crawl along, but if you keep crawling along, if you keep looking for me, and you keep moving and keeping your hands on the wall, eventually you will find and discover, just like in the burning house, you will find the way out. You will find the opening that reveals God to you, because he's not that far from each one of us. He desires to be known. He created you with the ability to discover him. It's just not as difficult as sometimes we make it. The problem is instinct. Our instinct. I tend to think I have a pretty good sense of direction. That's the reason I'm not a big fan of anybody in a little box that is trying to give me directions when I'm driving. It used to be Garmin, and now it's Siri. I'm convinced Siri has no clue. And because I have this sense of direction. And every time, turn right here. And my first thought was, well, I ain't turning right there. That's the wrong direction. That's stupid. Why would I go that way? Why would I go the wrong direction? I know that the right direction, I have a good sense of direction, and everything within me is saying go straight, and she's saying turn right here. And she won't let it go. If you go straight, turn right here. Recalculate. I don't want you to recalculate. I have made a decision based on my sense of direction. Let it go. And some people have that mindset with God. They've decided, I think there may be a God, and I'm going to look for him, but I'm going to follow my own instincts. God keeps saying, here I am. Yeah, I'm not going that way. I'm going to follow my own instincts. Go a little further. God, here I am. No, I'm not ready, God. I'm not ready. I'm going to follow my own instincts. Part of the conviction, being able to find God, is faith. I've dealt with people that I just want to know that God is real. Until you just believe by faith, you will never know that God is real. If you will not look around and see the creation of the world in which we live, and if that does not convince you that there is a God, then you are going to have to stop relying on your own instincts. You turn to him in faith and just believe. And if you believe, you will find him. If you come to him in prayer, hoping that he exists, hoping that he wants to know you, hoping that somehow that he would have the answer for your life, but you're still not sure, he tells us to come with him with this strong, deep conviction. Come to him in faith. Anything else complicates life, complicates our convictions. You know, if you could meet with anyone in the world today, who would it be? You ever thought about that? I did when I watched the news. I think every president in my adult life, at some point, watching the news, I thought, I wish I just had a few minutes to talk to them. Just a few moments to be able to talk to them. Sports guy, many athletes. Boy, I wish I could talk to them. Here's the thing. And usually, and this is where, at some point, I'm thinking, boy, if I could just talk to them and explain how the world works. Because I've got it all figured out. Why would they ever talk to me? These people don't want to talk to me. Because when you think about it, the person who in the world, if you could talk to anybody in the world that's living today, who would it be? Maybe it's an entertainer. Maybe it's a person of power and authority. Maybe it's a person who has great wealth, and you're hoping that maybe if you talk to him, you get a little bit of that wealth. Hey, Bill, you like William or you go by Bill? Why? Why would they take time to talk to you? God wants to talk to you. He wants you to talk to him. Other people may not be interested in hearing your opinion. God invites your opinion about him. He says, come, let us reason together. And if you come earnestly and honestly seeking Him, you'll see that He cares. He created you to know Him, and He is continually working in your life to reveal Himself to you. He does. He creates circumstances sometimes for the reason, the sole reason and purpose to say, to tell you, I'm here. I'm here. A story that just crushed me this week. And you probably heard of it. Some of you heard of it as well. The 16-year-old boy who got trapped in the back of a minivan, third seat at school. I don't know how it happened. He had his phone, and he called 911. And they sent the police out, but they couldn't find the minivan. And he called back. He says, I'm dying. Send someone. I'm dying. Tell my mother I love her. To be pleading for your own life and not to have someone on the other end of the line that was listening. God's listening. He's listening. And if you earnestly want to find Him, He's there. In crisis moments, I can feel my way towards Him. And I may never be able to answer the reason in the moment, at the time for the crisis. But because I can find God, I know He exists, and I know that He wants to know me. I'm convinced of that. I'm also convinced that God is the source of our existence. In verse 28, he says, for in Him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed His offspring, being then God's offspring. We ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. God is the source of our existence. He is not the source of our imagination. We are His children. And the reality is, it's kind of like teenagers. At some point, teenagers, you want to express your own personality. You kind of get to that point where you just want, you kind of buck against your parents a little bit. You're trying to spread your wings. This is who I am. And you push back some. And as parents, we look at it sometimes and think, man, you don't understand. Because you don't. You haven't had the experiences that we have had. You can't appreciate life. We may not understand all the things that go on in your life and in your world, but we understand the world a whole lot better than you give us credit for because of experience. And so it gives us a deeper appreciation for those things. Of course, the conflict then becomes between a teen and a parent, but you aren't interested in my life. You're just not interested in my life. And as a parent, the thought is, but I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help you. So I am interested. I'm trying to help you. The things that I'm telling you, have you ever heard this? I'm telling you this for your own good. This is, as a parent, we have to find that balance of guiding and letting them eventually discover for themselves. And you know what that is when they discover for themselves? Maturity. Maturity is when you realize, oh, Mom and Dad aren't complete idiots. The things that they were saying was right. They did know. They did know more about life than I gave them credit for. And see, that's the way it is with God in our existence. Is maturity, spiritual maturity comes to where we recognize, oh no, God is right. I've been pushing against Him and trying to do life my own way, but it was God. And I owe my whole existence to Him. This life isn't just about me. So you have three options. When God is telling you to do something different than what you're doing, one is to reject God's existence in order to have full autonomy. That's that flimsy conviction. I'm going to reject that God exists. That way I can do what I want to do. If God doesn't exist, then, like I said before, then you're free to do whatever you want to do. You know, I don't care what anybody says. They can try to rationalize their morals however they want to. The reality is, if there is no God, then who are you to tell me what my moral standing ought to be? And the reason for rejecting God and His existence is so people can do what they want to do. So they can be their own God. The problem is they just don't like it when other people want to be their God. Or they don't like it when they can't be other people's gods. That never works. Your second option is to change God into a God more like you. If God just understood me more. If he just got to where, and that's a shaky conviction. You know, on your best days, your faults stand out. You really want a God? Think of all your faults. Because when we think about these things, we always justify and we argue from our strengths. It's not that bad. I'm a pretty decent person. What I want to do here really isn't all that bad. But when you bring God down to who you are, you can't just bring Him down to your good points. You got to bring Him down to your bad points too. Your bad characteristics. You no longer have a God. You just have a better version of you. And on your best days, on my best days, we all get it wrong at times. And we need a God who is sovereign, who wants to know us. We need, the third option is to be convinced that all that you are and all that you will ever be is from God. That you have your being in Him. And then lastly, be convinced that God can only be known through His plan. In verse 30, Paul told them the times of ignorance God overlooked. But now He commands all people everywhere to repent, because He has fixed a day on which He will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom He has appointed. And of this He has given assurance to all by raising Him from the dead. And He's talking about His Son, Jesus Christ. And we need to be convinced, as Paul is introducing the Athenians to Jesus Christ, He is the only way to know God. And He is exactly who He says He is. He is God manifested in the flesh. He is the only mediator between God and men, is Jesus Christ. Jesus Himself said that He was the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through Him. This idea that God is okay with your life, that I'm going to believe in God, and I'll come to God, but I'm going to come to Him on my own terms. You can come to Him just as you are. You can come to Him with all your sins, with all your faults and all your failures, and He'll reveal Himself to you. And you will see that all your faults and all your failures have gone against the sovereign God. And you have a need to be cleansed and made right with God. And he says the only way that can happen is through his Son, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross as a payment for your sins. And if you place your faith in what Jesus Christ did upon the cross, that will restore you in relationship to God. And nothing else will. You'll never do enough good works. All of our good works fall short. We have to be convinced that the only way to know the God who wants to know us is to come to him on his terms. And the only way we can come to him is through his Son, Jesus Christ. That he wants to know you. I'm going to ask you to stay with your head bowed and eyes closed as we do our service.